What if one moment on an ordinary day could change everything you thought you knew about respect, fairness, and dignity? Imagine sitting with your child on a plane, your tickets in hand, when suddenly you're told those seats aren't really yours. Not because of a mistake, not because of safety, but because someone else, a stranger, demanded you move. Now pause and ask yourself, what would you do? Would you step aside quietly, hoping to avoid confrontation, or would you stay seated, knowing your child is watching, learning whether their place in this world can be taken away without a fight? This is exactly what happened to Elaine Brooks, a black mother traveling with her 9-year-old son. What started as a simple request from the crew turned into a defining moment, one that forced her to choose between peace and principle. Her decision didn't just change her son's life. It sparked a chain of events that shook an entire airline and inspired a movement. If it were you, could you stay strong? Could you look into your child's eyes and teach them that dignity is never for sale? The boarding area of Newark Liberty International Airport was alive with its usual chaos. Children tugging at tired parents, business travelers balancing laptops and phones. The sharp voice of gate agents repeating, "Now boarding Group 3," like a drumbeat. Inside the jet bridge, the air shifted. It was cooler, quieter, the muffled roar of the terminal fading into the hum of aircraft systems. Elaine Brooks stepped into the cabin, her son's small hand resting in hers. She exhaled slowly, centering herself. At 38, Elaine carried herself with a kind of calm dignity that made people look twice, though she rarely noticed. Her dark hair was tied neatly back, her gray blazer still crisp from a morning of meetings in Manhattan. Beside her, 9-year-old Caleb's eyes were wide with curiosity. He loved flying, loved the neat rows of buttons above the seats, the way the engines rumbled like giants stretching before a sprint. Their seats 1A and 1B waited at the front of the aircraft, just past the curtain that separated first class from the rest of the world. Elaine guided Caleb into his seat, helping him buckle in. She stowed their small carry-on beneath the seat in front of her and offered him a smile. "You good, buddy?" she asked. Caleb nodded, already pressing the overhead light button, watching it blink on and off. "This one's ours." "Right. We're in the very front." "That's right," Elaine said softly. "Best seats in the house." For a moment, everything felt settled. Cabin crew bustled quietly. Overhead bins snapped shut. Passengers murmured as they adjusted jackets and headphones. Elaine pulled out her phone to glance at her email briefs waiting back in Atlanta. Investors wanting updates. For once, she had promised herself she wouldn't think about work until they landed. Then the click of high heels cut through the hum. A tall woman appeared in the aisle. White blazer, pearl earrings, her platinum elite lanyard swinging proudly from her neck. She paused at the row, her sharp blue eyes narrowing on Elaine and Caleb. "That's my seat," the woman said, her tone clipped, practiced with years of entitlement. She gestured at 1A, where Elaine sat. "And that's mine as well." She flicked her wrist toward 1B. Elaine blinked, sitting up straighter. "I think there must be some mistake," she said politely. "These are our seats, 1A and 1B. The woman's lips curled into something between a smile and a sneer. "There's no mistake. I'm Margaret Sloan, Platinum Elite. I always sit here. You'll need to move." Elaine felt Caleb stiffen beside her. His small fingers gripped the armrest. "I'm sorry," Elaine replied evenly, her voice calm but firm. "We booked these seats weeks ago. Our boarding passes show—" "Doesn't matter," Margaret cut in. She leaned closer, her perfume sharp in the confined space. "Certain seats are meant for certain passengers. People like me, not—" She stopped just short of saying the words, but the pause was heavy enough to fill in the blanks. Elaine felt the familiar burn low in her chest, the mix of anger and exhaustion that came when someone tried to reduce her to her skin. She'd faced it in boardrooms, at conferences, in restaurants where her credit card was checked twice. But here, in front of her son, that was different. "Mom," Caleb whispered, tugging at her sleeve. His voice was small, frightened. "Are we in the wrong place?" Elaine looked at him, her heart breaking. That question so innocent, so honest, cut deeper than Margaret's words ever could. "No, baby," Elaine said softly, brushing his curls back from his forehead. "We are exactly where we're supposed to be." But her words only seemed to irritate Margaret more. She straightened, glanced down the aisle, and raised her voice. "Excuse me, flight attendant. We have a seating issue here." Heads turned. A ripple of curiosity moved through the cabin. Some passengers shifted uncomfortably. Others lifted their phones, discreetly angling their cameras. Elaine inhaled deeply, forcing her body to stay still, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Outwardly, she appeared composed. Inside, though, her thoughts wrestled. Not again. Not in front of Caleb. Do I fight this? Do I sit quietly and teach my son to swallow injustice? Or do I make a stand? Knowing how they'll label me if I raise my voice. Angry, aggressive, unruly. The choice loomed, heavy and unfair. The curtain at the galley rustled, and the flight supervisor emerged. A woman in her 40s, crisp uniform, a practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes. Her name tag read Carla Whitman. "What seems to be the problem here?" Carla asked, her tone already leaning toward Margaret, as if the outcome were predetermined. Margaret placed a hand dramatically on her chest. "This woman and her child are sitting in my seats. I fly this route every month. These are mine." Carla turned to Elaine with a look that was half apology, half condescension. "Ma'am, perhaps there's been a mistake. May I see your boarding pass?" Elaine handed it over without a word. Carla scanned it, nodded, but didn't hand it back right away. Instead, she leaned slightly closer, lowering her voice. "Mrs. Brooks," she said, "we have a full flight today. Could I ask you to be flexible? Maybe take seats further back so we can accommodate Ms. Sloan here. She's a valued customer." Elaine's jaw tightened. Flexible. That word had followed her through life like a shadow. Flexible when a deal went to a man with less experience. Flexible when a realtor showed her neighborhoods she hadn't asked for. Flexible when her son was mistaken for someone older, someone dangerous. Her hand found Caleb's again, steadying him. She forced her voice to stay measured. "We're not moving. These are our seats." Carla's smile faltered. Margaret scoffed loudly, shaking her head as if this were some outrageous breach of etiquette. The hum of the cabin seemed to grow louder. Tension thickened, pressing against Elaine's chest. And deep inside, the question rose again, echoing Caleb's small voice. "Are we in the wrong place?" Elaine straightened in her seat, her spine tall, her gaze unflinching. No matter what happened next, she knew one truth: she and her son belonged exactly where they were, and she was ready to prove it. The hum of the aircraft deepened as more passengers boarded, filing past the quiet standoff at row 1. Elaine kept her posture steady, her fingers intertwined with Caleb's, her eyes fixed ahead as if staring down an invisible horizon. But inside, her heart drummed a steady, heavy beat. Carla Whitman still held the boarding passes in her hand. She looked at Margaret Sloan, then back at Elaine, then back again, weighing something that seemed less about fairness and more about loyalty to the airline's hierarchy of valuable passengers. Margaret's lips curled, satisfied, as if victory was already hers. "Mrs. Brooks," Carla said again, her voice just low enough to sound rehearsed. "I understand your boarding passes show these seats, but Ms. Sloan is one of our most frequent and loyal flyers. If you could just be understanding. Perhaps I can offer you compensation or reseating further back. There are seats available in row 12. It's still economy plus. Spacious enough? Row 12. Elaine heard the number and felt the insult burn. First class wasn't about space for her. It was about dignity. About finally being able to sit where she had paid to sit, where her family had earned their right to rest after years of sacrifice. She looked at Caleb, his small face pale under the dim cabin lights. "Mom," he whispered, "do we have to go?" Elaine shook her head, her voice firm but soft. "No, sweetheart, we don't." Margaret let out an exaggerated sigh, tossing her designer tote into the seat across the aisle. "This is ridiculous," she muttered, loud enough for the nearest rows to hear. Some people just don't understand how this works. The words carried a weight sharper than their surface. Elaine felt every eye in first class trained on her, waiting for her response. Some looked curious, some uncomfortable, a few supportive, but no one yet brave enough to intervene. Then, from behind them, a man's voice broke the silence. "She's right where she belongs." Elaine turned, an older black man with a thin frame. Silver hair cropped close, leaned slightly into the aisle. He wore a simple brown cardigan and glasses perched on his nose. His boarding pass was tucked into the front pocket, still sticking out from where he'd placed it. "I've been teaching for 40 years, he said, his voice steady but weathered. "And I can tell you, a lesson is being written right here. That boy deserves to see his mother stand tall, not be pushed back because someone waves a membership card." The cabin hushed. Margaret sputtered, "Excuse me, who are you two?" But Carla raised her hand, silencing him with a polite but sharp, "Sir, I must ask you not to interfere." Interfere. The man chuckled without humor. Interference is when you take away what's been rightfully given. Speaking truth is never interference. He leaned back, shaking his head, but his eyes stayed locked on Elaine's for a moment, offering her a quiet nod of solidarity. Elaine felt a swell of gratitude, but kept her voice measured. "Thank you, sir." Margaret rolled her eyes, pulling out her phone. "Well, I'm not going to waste my time arguing with strangers. I'll just show my followers what's happening here." She tapped her screen, angling the camera toward Elaine and Caleb. Her voice turned sweet, laced with venom. "Here we are again. Folks, seats being taken by people who don't belong. Platinum status means nothing these days." The red recording light blinked. Elaine's stomach tightened. It wasn't just humiliation. Now it was exposure. Her face, her son's frightened eyes, being broadcast into the echo chamber of someone who thrived on outrage. Carla shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. Elaine drew in a slow breath, focusing on keeping her voice level. She knew what would happen if she snapped. If she raised her tone even slightly, the narrative would tilt against her. Angry black woman, unruly passenger. Her thoughts whirled. Do I rise to meet her challenge? Or do I stay silent and teach Caleb endurance instead of resistance? What lesson will he carry from this plane into the rest of his life? "Mom," Caleb whispered again, his voice trembling. "Why is she filming us?" Elaine reached out, covering his hand with hers. "Because some people don't know the truth when they see it," she murmured. "But we do." Just then, another passenger leaned forward, a young woman in her 20s, her dark hair pulled into a loose braid, spoke up. She has the boarding pass. We all saw it. Why are you still questioning this? Her accent carried the warmth of Spanish, her eyes flashing with quiet indignation. This isn't fair. Carla stiffened. Ma'am, please, let the crew handle this. The young woman shook her head. I fly this airline too. If this is how you treat paying customers, maybe it's not the passengers who need to move. The murmur of agreement spread like a ripple. Passengers whispered. Phones lifted, some recording. For the first time, Carla's veneer of control seemed to crack. Elaine sat still, absorbing every second. Her body was taut with restraint, but her mind was racing. She had spent years navigating rooms where her presence was questioned, where she had to prove she deserved a seat at the table. She had never wanted Caleb to see it so plainly, not so raw. And yet, here it was, his wide, worried eyes taking it all in, his small shoulders rising and falling with every anxious breath. Elaine squeezed his hand again, harder this time, grounding herself as much as him. Stay calm, stay steady. They cannot take what we have rightfully earned. Margaret continued recording, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Oh, look at this. Now everyone wants to play hero. But platinum status, loyalty, years of flying, none of it matters anymore. Apparently, this is what the world's come to. Elaine glanced at the flight attendant's watchful eyes, then at the phones recording around her. Something inside her shifted. The humiliation, the exhaustion, the insult. It was no longer just hers to bear. Caleb was watching, and so was everyone else. Her jaw tightened. She would not move. The aircraft door sealed with a heavy thud, the announcement echoing through the cabin flight attendants. Prepare doors for departure. But in row 1, nothing was prepared. Everything was suspended, balanced on the edge of a decision that would shape not just a flight, but the story a little boy carried about who his mother was and whether they belonged anywhere. Elaine straightened her spine and locked eyes with Carla. We're staying here. This is our seat, and I will not repeat myself again. The air in the cabin seemed to shift. Conversation stilled. Even Margaret paused her recording, sensing something had changed. Elaine's calm, unshakable tone carried a weight that filled the space between them. It was the kind of voice that came from years of standing firm in boardrooms, in courtrooms, in places where she had been underestimated and overlooked. Carla opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across her face, and for the first time, Caleb's shoulders seemed to relax, just a little. He looked at his mother with a spark of pride that cut through the fear. The battle wasn't over. In fact, Elaine knew it was only beginning. But in that moment, she had chosen, not silence, not retreat, strength. She was exactly where she was supposed to be. The engines rumbled beneath the floor, a low vibration that usually calmed Elaine, but tonight only made the tension throb in her chest. Around her, the air seemed to hold its breath. Margaret Sloane was still gripping her phone, though her smug tone had shifted into something sharper, the edge of frustration cutting through her every word. Carla Whitman lingered near the galley, her jaw tight, her eyes darting nervously toward the front as if hoping for a quick resolution. Caleb leaned into Elaine's shoulder, whispering, "Are they going to make us leave?" His voice was hushed, heavy with worry. Elaine touched his hand. "No, baby. We're not leaving." From row 3, a cough broke the silence, followed by another voice measured, "Steady. She's telling the truth. Those are their seats. I saw the boarding passes myself. Heads turned. It was Mr. Hayes, the retired teacher. His weathered hands folded across his lap. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried authority. He wasn't performing. He was simply stating fact. Carla stiffened. "Sir, I appreciate your concern, but this is a matter for the crew." Mr. Hayes adjusted his glasses, looking directly at her. "I've spent my life teaching young people about integrity, and right now, every eye in this cabin is watching you decide whether truth matters. Don't tell me to sit silent." There was a murmur, passengers shifting, the weight of his words pressing into the air. Margaret scoffed dramatically, tossing her phone onto her lap. "This is absurd. You people think rules don't apply to you. I've earned my right to this seat." Elaine's jaw clenched. The phrase hung like a blade. "You people." She felt the sting, but she also saw Caleb's wide eyes, searching her face for guidance. She knew she had to hold steady. Before she could respond, the young Hispanic woman who had spoken earlier leaned further into the aisle. "I don't care about your points or your status," she said firmly, her accent clear. "You can't steal a seat just because you think you're important." She looked around, her gaze sweeping the other passengers. "Are we really going to sit here and pretend this is okay?" A pause, then another voice, this time from a man in row 5. "Yeah, she's right. I saw the kid's ticket when they boarded. First class is for whoever paid, not whoever shouts the loudest." The murmuring grew louder. Elaine could feel it now, a current shifting. Passengers emboldened, the silent witnesses choosing sides. Margaret's face reddened. "Oh, so now it's a mob. Fine. Let's all gang up on the Platinum Elite member who actually keeps this airline running." Caleb flinched at her tone. Elaine bent her head, whispering so only he could hear. "Do you hear them? Sweetheart, do you hear how many people see the truth?" He nodded hesitantly, his grip on her sleeve loosening. Carla raised both hands as if to restore order. "Everyone, please. This disruption needs to stop before we can depart. Mrs. Brooks, if you would just move to row 12, we can put an end to all this." Elaine inhaled slowly, then exhaled, meeting Carla's eyes. "No, we will not be moved." Her tone was quiet but final, the kind of calm that left no room for negotiation. Carla faltered, her mouth opening and closing before she turned away toward the galley. Margaret slammed her phone down, the loud crack startling a few passengers. "This is insane. I'll make sure everyone sees how I was treated tonight." Elaine looked at her, not with anger, but with something colder, sharper. Maybe for once they'll see the whole story. The word struck. Margaret shifted in her seat, flustered. "Mr. Hayes leaned forward again, his voice directed toward Caleb now. "Young man, listen to your mother. She knows the truth. Don't let anyone take that from you." Caleb looked between them, his eyes moist but steadier than before. He whispered, almost to himself, "We belong here." Elaine felt the words sink into her chest. A small victory, quiet but powerful. The intercom crackled overhead. "Flight attendants, please prepare the cabin for departure." Carla reemerged, her voice tense as she spoke to the crew. "We can't take off until this is resolved." Her eyes flicked toward Elaine again. Frustration etched deep, but Elaine no longer felt alone. The cabin itself had shifted. A handful of passengers leaned forward, their gazes sharp, their phones recording. They weren't going to look away. Margaret muttered under her breath, her arms crossed tightly. "I can't believe this circus." First class used to mean something. Elaine turned to her son, brushing his cheek gently. First class means we're together. Don't forget that. Caleb gave a tiny nod, his shoulders squaring just slightly. It was then Elaine felt something stir within her, a recognition. This wasn't just a fight for 2 seats. It was a moment her son would remember long after the plane landed. She could either teach him that silence kept the peace, or she could show him that dignity was worth the discomfort. And she had made her choice. The engines roared louder, signaling readiness, but the cabin was caught in stillness, a standoff suspended in time. The supervisor was cornered, the entitled passenger rattled, the witnesses alert, and a boy looking to his mother as the final arbiter of truth. Elaine straightened her blazer, took Caleb's hand again, and sat firmly back in her seat. Oh, whatever storm was about to break, she would meet it head on, and she would not move. Elaine's phone vibrated in her blazer pocket. She hesitated, glancing at Caleb, then pulled it out quietly, shielding the screen from Margaret's probing eyes. The caller ID glowed, Victor Brooks. Relief spread through her chest like a sudden breath of fresh air. She pressed accept, bringing the phone to her ear, her voice low. Victor. On the other end. Her husband's voice was calm, but carried an edge of steel. Hell, what's going on? One of my contacts just texted me someone already posted a video from that flight. Elaine closed her eyes briefly. The speed of the internet. Already? Her son's worried face could be circling online. They're trying to force us out of our seats. A passenger. The supervisor. It's escalating. Victor's silence on the line was brief but heavy. Then came his steady response. Don't move. Don't give them an inch. I'm handling this now. Elaine's lips curved into the faintest smile. I wasn't planning to. Good. Victor replied. Stay calm for Caleb. I'll call you back in minutes. She ended the call, tucking the phone into her lap. Caleb leaned toward her, whispering, Was that Dad? Yes, Elaine murmured. And he said, We're staying right here. Margaret, still irritated, snorted at the exchange, calling for backup. You think anyone cares about your little complaint? You don't even understand how loyalty works in this business. Elaine ignored her, but her silence only seemed to provoke. Margaret leaned closer, her voice sharp. Platinum members keep this airline alive. Without us, you wouldn't even be sitting in this cabin. Elaine met her gaze, calm, steady. Without people like me, you wouldn't have an airline at all. Margaret blinked, startled at the firmness of her tone. For the first time, her smirk faltered. Meanwhile, Victor was already dialing. His office in Atlanta was filled with screens and secure lines, but he didn't wait to get back there. He paced the conference room he was in, colleagues watching as his voice turned into command. Anthony, he said sharply into the phone when the airline's vice president of operations answered. Your supervisor's trying to displace my wife and child from their first-class seats. While another passenger films and mocks them, I want eyes on that cabin immediately. Anthony Graves stammered. Mr. Brooks, of course. But let me verify. Victor cut him off. Verify nothing. I need the cabin camera feed pulled up now. And send someone from operations to that gate before that plane leaves Newark. Do you understand? Anthony's voice steadied, though it carried unease. Yes, sir. I'll dispatch Jordan Lee from operations. He's at the terminal, and I'll review the footage. Victor ended the call without another word. He looked at his colleagues, who had frozen mid-meeting. We'll continue later, he said tersely. Then he turned to his assistant. Clear my schedule. This is priority. Back on the plane. Carla reappeared, her face tight with tension. She knelt slightly toward Elaine. Mrs. Brooks, I need to insist. This flight cannot depart until the seating dispute is resolved. If you remain uncooperative, I'll have to call airport security. Elaine's eyes didn't waver. Call them. Carla blinked. Excuse me. Call them. Elaine repeated, her voice calm, low, immovable. I will not move. These are our seats, and I will not teach my son that intimidation wins over truth. So go ahead. Caleb's small hand clung to hers, and she could feel his pulse racing. She bent slightly, whispering in his ear, It's okay, baby. We don't back down when we're right. Passengers nearby stirred, phones still lifted, recording. Mr. Hayes muttered, That's courage. The young Hispanic woman crossed her arms defiantly, glaring at Carla. Margaret groaned, exasperated. This is unbelievable. Security should drag them out already. Her voice rang cruelly in Caleb's ears. He whispered again, almost pleading, Mom, what if they take us away? Elaine kissed the top of his head, keeping her own voice steady. They won't, because your father is already on it, as if on cue. Elaine's phone buzzed again. She answered quickly, pressing it to her ear. Victor's voice was direct. Stay seated. Anthony is reviewing the cabin feed now. An operations rep is on the way into the plane. They'll stop this before takeoff. Elaine allowed herself a slow exhale, her shoulders relaxing just slightly. Thank you. Victor's tone softened for a moment. No child should have to wonder if he belongs in a seat his family paid for. Caleb needs to see you win this. Hold on a little longer. Elaine felt her throat tighten. I will. The line clicked off. She slid the phone back into her pocket and straightened in her seat. Passengers around her were whispering now, the story spreading row by row. A man across the aisle leaned to his neighbor, saying, Did you hear her husband's calling the top execs right now? Margaret shifted, hearing the whispers, her confidence faltering for the first time. What kind of stunt are you pulling? She hissed toward Elaine. You think you can scare us with phone calls? Elaine didn't answer. She didn't need to. Carla glanced nervously toward the cockpit. Her voice lowered as she spoke into her radio. The tension in her body betrayed her. She knew someone higher than her was already involved. The engines hummed louder, but the cabin remained a theater of silence and stares. The confrontation had stretched longer than anyone expected, every second feeding into the growing unease that this flight was no longer routine. Caleb leaned against his mother's shoulder, whispering, Dad's coming to help. Elaine smiled faintly. He already is. The minutes stretched like hours. Every creak of the overhead bins, every rustle of a magazine seemed amplified in the tense silence that filled the cabin. Caleb sat pressed against his mother's side, quiet but alert, his eyes darting between the angry woman across the aisle and the tight-lipped supervisor hovering nearby. Elaine's calm expression hadn't wavered, but beneath her stillness, she was preparing herself for whatever storm was about to break. Then the jet bridge door hissed open again. The sound cut through the stillness, and every head in first class turned. A man in a navy suit entered, his badge clipped neatly to his jacket pocket. His presence radiated authority controlled, professional, but unyielding. He introduced himself with a short nod. Jordan Lee, Operations. Carla Whitman's relief was visible, though her nerves hadn't quite settled. She straightened quickly, smoothing her uniform. Mr. Lee, thank you for coming. We've got a situation. Jordan's eyes scanned the cabin, pausing on Margaret Sloane with her folded arms and fiery glare. then shifting to Elaine and Caleb sitting quietly in 1A and 1B. He studied them a moment longer, as though weighing not just the facts, but the deeper current beneath them. "I've already reviewed the boarding records," he said, his voice calm, but carrying through the cabin. "These seats were booked under Elaine and Caleb Brooks. Their boarding passes match. There's no error." A ripple passed through the passengers, some murmuring in agreement, others nodding. Elaine felt a wave of vindication wash through her chest, though she kept her expression steady for Caleb's sake. Margaret exploded. "What, that can't be right? I'm Platinum Elite. I always sit here. This is outrageous." She jabbed her finger toward Elaine. "They don't belong here." "I do." Jordan didn't flinch. "Ms. Sloan, your status doesn't override confirmed ticketing. First class isn't about who feels entitled. It's about who paid for the seat. And tonight, these seats are not yours." The blunt clarity of his words struck the cabin like a clap. Some passengers exhaled audibly, as though they had been holding their breath. "Mr. Hayes let out a quiet, satisfied chuckle. The young Hispanic woman whispered finally under her breath. Carla stepped forward, her voice hesitant. "Mr. Lee, perhaps we could reseat the Brooks family in Economy Plus and offer compensation." Sloan, as Jordan cut her off with a look. "Supervisor Whitman, are you suggesting we displace paying customers to appease another?" Carla faltered. "I just wanted to defuse the situation." "What you wanted," Jordan said firmly, "was convenience, at the expense of fairness." The words landed heavy, exposing her in front of the entire cabin. Elaine saw Carla's cheeks flush, her lips tightening as if she'd swallowed something bitter. Margaret shot up from her seat, her voice rising shrill. "I won't be treated like this. I've earned my place in this cabin. Years of loyalty. Thousands of dollars." Jordan raised a hand. "Ms. Sloan, enough." His voice was sharp now, brooking no argument. "Either take your assigned seat, or I will have you removed from this flight for disruptive behavior." Gas rippled through the rows. Phones tilted higher, catching every moment. Margaret's face twisted, her confidence unraveling. She sputtered, looking around the cabin for allies, but found none. Even those who might have once sympathized were silent now, unwilling to align themselves with her. Elaine glanced at her son. Caleb's eyes were wide, but this time with something new relief, even pride. She squeezed his hand, whispering, "See? The truth always shows." But Margaret wasn't done. Her voice dropped, venomous. "This isn't over. People like you think you can steal what doesn't belong to you. You'll see what happens when you cross the wrong person." Elaine felt the sting, but she didn't let it show. Instead, she leaned closer to Caleb, letting him hear the steadiness in her voice. "What belongs to us can't be stolen, no matter what anyone says." Jordan signaled to Carla, "Escort Ms. Sloan to her assigned seat, now." Carla hesitated, then moved reluctantly, guiding Margaret down the aisle as she muttered protests under her breath. Some passengers clapped softly, others shook their heads in disapproval. For a moment, the cabin exhaled. Tension that had been coiled like a spring seemed to ease, but Elaine knew this wasn't finished. Margaret's words still hung in the air, heavy with threat, and Carla's expression as she walked back toward the galley carried resentment, not humility. Jordan turned back to Elaine, his tone softening. "Mrs. Brooks, Mr. Brooks, thank you for your patience. I regret you were put in this situation at all. It shouldn't have happened." Elaine inclined her head, her voice even. "I appreciate you saying that." But the harm was already done. My son shouldn't have to wonder if he belongs where he's paid to be. Jordan's expression tightened. You're right, and I'll be reporting this up. He gave a final nod before heading toward the cockpit, his presence like a line drawn in the sand. Elaine leaned back in her seat, finally allowing herself a deep breath. Caleb shifted against her, whispering, Mom, we get to stay. She smiled, brushing his cheek with her hand. Yes, baby, we stay. But even as she said it, she knew the incident had already left its mark. Caleb's innocence had been forced to confront an ugly truth too soon, and while they had won the battle of the seats, the larger war, the one about dignity and belonging, was far from over. Across the cabin, Mr. Hayes caught her eye, offering another small nod of solidarity. The young Hispanic woman gave a thumbs up. Passengers whispered, but this time the current had shifted. Elaine was no longer just a mother with a child in a disputed seat. She was a symbol, however reluctantly, of resistance against entitlement. Elaine exhaled slowly, feeling Caleb's hand in hers. The storm had passed for now, but she could sense a larger reckoning forming on the horizon, and she was ready for it. The cabin settled, but the calm was fragile, like glass stretched too thin. Margaret had been escorted to her seat several rows back, her voice still hissing under her breath, but her presence no longer loomed in the front row. Passengers leaned into whispered conversations, exchanging opinions, sharing snippets of video they had already captured. The hum of the engines became louder, as if eager to break the tension that lingered. Elaine sat upright, her hand resting protectively over Caleb's. He was calmer now, though his small eyes kept flicking toward the aisle, watching for Margaret's return. Elaine leaned close, whispering reassurance. It's okay, baby. We're safe. But inside, she knew the truth. They weren't truly safe. Not yet. Margaret's venomous words echoed in her head, and Carla's face when Jordan had challenged her still burned in her memory. This wasn't over. From the galley curtain, Carla reappeared. Her steps were precise, her face carefully composed, but her eyes betrayed the tension boiling beneath her calm facade. She crouched beside Elaine, lowering her voice so only those in row 1 could hear. Mrs. Brooks, she said, her tone icy polite. I'd like to remind you that while you've chosen to remain in these seats, cooperation with crew instructions is required by law. Any further resistance may have consequences. Elaine met her gaze without flinching. I followed every instruction. What I resisted was an injustice. Carla's jaw tightened. We'll see how the captain feels about it. She straightened and moved briskly toward the cockpit, her radio clutched in her hand. Caleb looked up at his mother, whispering, What does she mean? Elaine smoothed his hair gently. She's trying to scare us, but we don't let fear win. Remember, Mr. Hayes leaned forward slightly from his row, his voice a low rumble. She's shaken. That's why she's lashing out. But don't let it rattle you. Everyone here saw what happened. Elaine gave him a grateful nod, but inside, her stomach twisted. She knew well enough that truth wasn't always enough to protect you, especially when power tilted against you. Moments later, the cockpit door cracked open. A man in his 50s stepped out, his pilot uniform immaculate, his captain's stripes gleaming under the cabin lights. Captain Ronald Myers had the posture of authority, but his face bore the weariness of someone called into disputes too many times. He looked first at Carla, who began whispering urgently in his ear, then turned his eyes to Elaine. The entire cabin hushed again. Captain Myers cleared his throat. Mrs. Brooks, I understand there has been some confusion with seating arrangements. There was no confusion, Elaine answered calmly. Our seats were confirmed. Boarding passes were checked. The confusion began when your supervisor tried to displace us. The captain's lips pressed into a thin line. He looked at Carla, then back at Elaine. I need you to understand my priority is safety. If this dispute continues, it threatens the order of the cabin. Sometimes the best course is compromise. Elaine's chest tightened. The word again, compromise? Always asked of her, never of the ones who created the problem. Captain, she said steadily, the best course is justice. If safety matters, then so does truth. My son has already been humiliated enough tonight. We will not be moved. A murmur of agreement swept through nearby rows. The young Hispanic woman raised her voice. She's right. We all saw it. Stop pretending this is just about safety. Phones lifted again, capturing every word. The captain noticed, his expression shifting with discomfort. He glanced at Jordan Lee, who stood firmly at the bulkhead. Jordan's voice was cool, but commanding. Captain, Operations has already verified the Brooks family's claim. They are rightfully seated. Any further attempt to remove them would be against policy. Carla bristled. With all due respect, Operations doesn't have to manage the cabin in real time. We do. Jordan didn't flinch. And with all due respect, Supervisor Whitman, Operations doesn't ignore ticketing records to cater to privilege. We enforce fairness. The clash of authority hung in the air. Captain Myers rubbed his temple, clearly torn between his crew and the chain of command above him. Finally, he sighed, his shoulders sagging. We'll proceed as scheduled. Mrs. Brooks and her son will remain in their seats. Relief rippled through the cabin. A few passengers clapped softly. Caleb gripped his mother's hand with both of his, whispering, "We did it." "Mom." Elaine squeezed back. Though she kept her face composed, she knew better than to celebrate too soon. Carla's face was flushed, her eyes narrowing as she turned away sharply. Margaret's voice hissed from the back of the cabin, though her words were drowned out by the renewed hum of passengers. As the captain returned to the cockpit, Jordan lingered, leaning down to Elaine. "This isn't the end. I'll be filing a full report. My advice document everything you've experienced tonight." Elaine nodded. "Already done." Her phone was filled with recordings. Caleb's anxious voice captured alongside Margaret's entitlement and Carla's dismissive tone. Proof. But proof was only as strong as those willing to act on it. The safety demonstration began. Flight attendants reciting lines with mechanical precision, though their voices trembled slightly under the weight of scrutiny. Passengers listened, but their attention was still fixed on the drama that had unfolded. Phones remained ready, eyes still sharp. As the plane taxied, Elaine leaned close to her son. "No matter what happens, remember belonging isn't given by them. It's ours. We claim it." Caleb nodded, his small chest rising with pride. For the first time that night, he seemed lighter, braver. Yet as the plane lifted off, Elaine's thoughts weren't on the clouds outside. They were on the storm still gathering inside. Margaret's threats, Carla's hostility, the captain's reluctant compromise. This battle was only beginning, and Elaine knew, with Victor working behind the scenes, that the reckoning waiting for the crew would be far greater than anything that had happened in the cabin. The plane climbed steadily into the night sky, its nose cutting through layers of clouds that glowed faintly under the moonlight. From the outside, it was just another routine flight, a silver bird carrying hundreds of passengers across states. But inside, the air was taut. vibrating with more than the engines. Passengers shifted uneasily. Conversations hushed, every glance still circling back to row 1. Elaine sat rigid, her back pressed against the seat, her fingers resting lightly over Caleb's hand. The boy leaned against her shoulder, eyes half-lidded with exhaustion, but still flicking open at every sound. He hadn't relaxed fully since Margaret first appeared, and Elaine could feel his small body holding tension. It didn't know how to release. She tilted her head, whispering in his ear, "Close your eyes, baby. Rest. I'm here." Caleb nodded, but didn't let go of her arm. His whisper was soft, almost fragile. "Mom, what if she comes back? What if they make us leave later?" Elaine pressed a kiss to his forehead. "Then we stand again, just like we did. And we don't move. Because we belong." She said it with conviction, but inside, her thoughts twisted. Margaret's venomous stare, Carla's icy threats, even the captain's hesitation, they lingered like shadows. She had won the moment, yes, but at what cost? Caleb's innocence had been pierced. And for herself, the humiliation of once again proving her right to exist where she had earned the right to be, it gnawed at her. "Mr. Hayes leaned slightly into the aisle, his voice low but steady. "You did well, Mrs. Brooks. Your boy will remember your strength longer than he'll remember their cruelty." Elaine turned her head toward him, her lips curving into a faint smile. "Strength feels heavy tonight." Hayes nodded knowingly. "It always does. But it builds something in him that no one can take away." Before she could respond, a sudden ding sounded from the intercom. Carla's voice filled the cabin, too polished, too controlled. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be encountering some mild turbulence shortly. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." Her announcement was standard, but the undercurrent wasn't lost on Elaine. Carla's voice lingered just a little too long on the word remain, almost like a warning. Elaine's jaw tightened. The turbulence came quickly, rattling the cabin with a series of jolts that made passengers grip their armrests. Caleb whimpered, pressing his face into Elaine's side. She wrapped her arm around him, whispering, "It's okay, baby. Just bumps in the sky." Margaret's voice, sharp even over the rumble, floated from further back. "Unbelievable. First I'm robbed of my seat, and now we're flying through storms. Worst airline service I've ever had." A few passengers groaned audibly, rolling their eyes. The young Hispanic woman in row 2 muttered just loud enough to be heard, "Worst service or worst attitude." A ripple of quiet laughter spread, easing some of the tension. Elaine felt Caleb's small body relax just slightly against her, but Carla was back in the aisle, moving despite the seatbelt sign being lit. She paused at row 1, her expression tight. She bent low, her voice clipped. "I'll say this once more. Mrs. Brooks, cooperate with the crew, or I'll ensure a report is filed that will follow you beyond this flight." Elaine met her gaze calmly, though her pulse ticked faster. "File what you like, but the report will be incomplete without the truth everyone here has already recorded." Carla's lips thinned, her eyes flashing. She stood abruptly and stalked down the aisle, her shoes striking the floor harder than necessary. Caleb tilted his face up at his mother. What did she mean? A report? Elaine stroked his hair. "She means a story she'll try to tell about us. But remember, baby truth tells the stronger story, and we have it." Jordan Lee returned from the cockpit, his expression focused. He crouched by Elaine's seat, his voice low. "Mrs. Brooks, I wanted to check on you and your son. Operations has escalated this, Your husband is in contact with Anthony Graves. Things will be handled when we land." Elaine gave a slight nod. "Thank you. But until then, my son and I will sit here in peace." Jordan's eyes softened. "You're showing more grace than most. Could—" As he moved back toward the galley, Elaine felt a quiet shift. More passengers were openly watching her with something like respect, not pity. A middle-aged woman across the aisle leaned forward and said gently, "You're teaching us all something tonight." Elaine offered a polite smile, though inside she felt the weight of that expectation pressing down harder. She hadn't set out to be a symbol. She only wanted her son to sit in the seat she had bought for him. Yet here she was, her reluctant banner of defiance in a metal tube 30,000 feet above the ground. The turbulence subsided, the plane smoothing into steady flight. Lights dimmed, and passengers settled into uneasy silence. Caleb finally closed his eyes, his breathing evening out as exhaustion overtook him. Elaine brushed her hand gently along his arm, her heart aching at the sight of his fragile peace. She turned her gaze to the window. Beyond the glass, stars scattered across the dark expanse, indifferent to the chaos inside the cabin. Her reflection stared back tired, resolute, and carrying a strength she sometimes wished she didn't have to wield so often. "In the shadows of the galley," Carla whispered fiercely into her radio, her eyes occasionally darting toward Elaine's row. Margaret, further back, still muttered complaints under her breath, her indignation undimmed. And Elaine sat quietly, a storm of her own swirling beneath her composed exterior. She thought of Victor, his calm but commanding voice. She thought of Caleb, sleeping now but scarred by what he had seen. And she thought of herself tired of fighting battles that should never have existed in the first place. Still, one truth anchored her. They were here. They had not moved. And they would not. The cabin was quieter now, but the quiet felt uneasy, like the pause before thunder. The flight attendants moved with practiced smiles, offering drinks and adjusting trays, though their eyes betrayed the tension that lingered from the confrontation. Elaine sat still, her arm around Caleb as he slept, his small chest rising and falling in rhythm with the steady hum of the engines. She looked at his peaceful face and felt the ache settle deeper in her chest. Children should dream of adventures in the clouds, not wonder whether they belonged in the seat their mother had worked so hard to earn. She stroked his hair lightly, whispering words he couldn't hear, as much for herself as for him. "You belong, my love. Always." From a few rows back. Margaret Sloane's voice cut through the soft hum, pitched high enough to reach Elaine's ears. She was speaking to another passenger, her tone dripping with disdain. "I'm telling you, this airline has lost its standards. Letting just anyone sit in the front. It ruins the experience for the rest of us." Several passengers glanced her way, annoyed. One man muttered, "Maybe it's not the airline ruining the experience." Laughter bubbled quietly in response, though Margaret ignored it, her posture stiff with indignation. Elaine's heart clenched, but she didn't turn. She knew better than to give Margaret more fuel, yet she couldn't shake the worry of what Caleb would feel when he woke and heard those words again. Carla passed down the aisle, her expression carefully neutral, but her eyes lingered on Elaine longer than necessary. There was no warmth there, only a sharp, cold resentment. Elaine recognized it instantly. It wasn't just about a passenger dispute anymore. Carla had been embarrassed in front of the cabin, and she wanted to reclaim her authority. Jordan Lee noticed it too. He stepped from the galley, intercepting Carla with a quiet word, "Supervisor." May I remind you that this situation is already under review. The best course is to complete the flight without further escalation." Carla's voice was tight. "You don't run this cabin?" "I do." Jordan's reply was calm but firm. "And I'll ensure that what happens in this cabin is fully reported to headquarters. Choose carefully." Passengers nearby leaned subtly to listen, their phones still close at hand. Carla forced a brittle smile and moved on, but Elaine could feel the sting behind it. "Mr.?" Hayes leaned forward from his seat, speaking softly so only Elaine could hear. "People like that, they don't forgive being proven wrong. But you don't need to carry her anger. You've already done what you needed to do for yourself and for your boy." Elaine nodded faintly, appreciating the weight of his words. Still, her mind circled around the same thought. What will Caleb remember from tonight? Will he remember me standing strong? Or will the sting of humiliation be louder in his memory? Her phone vibrated softly. She slipped it from her pocket and saw Victor's name again. "Careful not to wake Caleb," she answered in a whisper. "Victor." She breathed. His voice was steady, but beneath it ran a current of anger held in check. "I've been briefed." Anthony Graves confirmed he's seen the footage. Jordan Lee handled things correctly, but Carla and Margaret won't walk away untouched. I promise you that. Elaine closed her eyes for a moment. "I don't want revenge, Victor. I just don't want Caleb to keep living through this." "I know," he said softly. "And that's why I'll see this through. This isn't just about one flight. It's about making sure the next black child who boards a plane doesn't feel like an intruder in the seat his family paid for. Trust me, this ends with accountability." Her throat tightened. She wanted to believe him, and part of her did. Victor had always been relentless when it came to protecting his family, but she also knew systems didn't change overnight. "Still," she whispered, "thank you." After the call, she tucked the phone away and shifted, gazing out the small oval window. The stars blurred against the darkness, endless and distant. She thought about the generations before her grandmother who had been denied restaurants, her mother who had been told which neighborhoods weren't for them, and now her own son, on a plane, facing the same old story in a new costume. The thought pressed heavy, but alongside it came a surge of determination. She wouldn't let it break them. A soft voice interrupted her thoughts. The young Hispanic woman leaned across the aisle, her expression gentle. "Señora, I just wanted to say you're inspiring. You didn't yell. You didn't lose control. You showed strength in the calmest way. People are watching, and they'll remember it." Elaine offered a small smile. "Thank you. I didn't want to be inspiring tonight. I just wanted my son to feel safe." The woman's eyes softened. Sometimes being strong for our children makes us stronger for everyone else, too. Elaine nodded slowly, her chest tightening again. She knew the woman was right, even if she hadn't chosen this role. The flight stretched on. Flight attendants moved cautiously, offering drinks, though their steps were quicker past row 1, as if trying not to linger. Margaret continued to mutter complaints to anyone who would listen, her voice a grating presence in the background. Carla disappeared into the galley for long stretches, emerging only when necessary, her face set in tight lines. But the passengers, ordinary people caught in the crossfire, had shifted. Where earlier there had been silence, now there was quiet solidarity. A nod from a businessman across the aisle. A smile from a young couple further back. Even a soft, "Good for you," whispered as someone passed to the restroom. Elaine felt it all, each gesture like a thread weaving into something larger. Perhaps not justice, not yet, but recognition. Caleb stirred against her shoulder, blinking awake. His voice was groggy. "Are we still here?" Elaine kissed his temple. "We're still here." His lips curved into a sleepy smile before he nestled back into her side. That small smile was enough to remind her why she was enduring this weight, why she had chosen to hold steady no matter how heavy it felt. The cabin lights dimmed further as the plane cruised deeper into the night. Shadows stretched across the seats, softening faces, making the cabin feel almost intimate despite its size. Elaine closed her eyes briefly, holding Caleb close, her resolve a quiet flame that refused to go out. She knew the landing would bring a reckoning. Victor was already moving pieces. Anthony Graves had seen the footage, and Jordan Lee had stood his ground. Accountability was coming, and when it did, it wouldn't just be about one mother and her son. It would be about a truth too long ignored. But for now, in the hush of the cabin, with her son's small body warm against her side, Elaine let herself breathe. The storm was not yet over, but she had weathered its heart. The steady hum of the engines had become almost hypnotic, but the tension in the cabin refused to die. Passengers shifted in their seats, some dozing, others scrolling on their phones, but a strange undercurrent still lingered, an awareness that what had unfolded in row 1 was far from finished. Elaine stroked Caleb's curls gently as he rested against her, her eyes fixed on the darkness beyond the window. She wanted him to sleep through the rest of the flight, shielded from more venom. But even in his slumber, his small body would twitch at sudden voices or the sound of footsteps too close. She knew he wasn't fully at peace. The intercom crackled, and Carla's voice returned, too smooth, too deliberate. "Ladies and gentlemen, in consideration of our valued passengers, we'll be offering a complimentary round of drinks. Thank you for your patience." The words were coated in honey, but Elaine heard the bitterness beneath them. This wasn't generosity, it was damage control, a way to distract the cabin from the humiliation she and Caleb had endured. Margaret Sloan, several rows back, spoke up just loud enough for others to hear. Finally, something decent after the circus in first class. Maybe this airline remembers who really matters. A few groans echoed. One passenger muttered, "Give it a rest already." But Margaret sat taller, lips pressed thin, still certain of her superiority. Elaine kept her gaze forward, unwilling to give Margaret even the satisfaction of acknowledgement. But inside, her thoughts churned. How many times had she endured this dance? The aggressor spewing venom, the bystanders sighing, and she left to shoulder the weight. The same patterns, just different settings, boardrooms, restaurants, now airplanes, and always her dignity forced to balance against silence. "Mr. Hayes leaned slightly into the aisle, his eyes kind but sharp. "No, don't waste your strength on her noise. You already won. Don't let her drag you back into the mud." Elaine nodded faintly, appreciating his wisdom. But she also felt the truth tugging at her ribs. Winning the seat didn't erase the harm. Caleb would carry this memory long after they landed. Jordan Lee reappeared, his notepad in hand. He stopped at Elaine's row, lowering his voice. "Mrs. Brooks, I'm documenting everything for my report. When we land, there will be a formal review. Your husband is already pushing this through the highest channels." Elaine inclined her head. "Thank you. But know this, I don't want my son growing up thinking his seat in life is always negotiable. That's the lesson I'm fighting for tonight." Jordan's eyes softened. Understood. And it's the right fight. Carla passed again, her tray balanced with glasses of soda and small bottles of wine. Her smile was stiff, her tone brittle as she offered drinks to passengers around row 1, deliberately skipping Elaine and Caleb. It was subtle, a quiet exclusion, but Elaine caught it immediately. So did others. The young Hispanic woman raised her voice. "Excuse me. Aren't you forgetting row 1?" Carla's mask cracked for just a moment. "I'll come back." She moved quickly down the aisle, her heels striking the floor. Elaine felt a knot form in her stomach. Sharper now. The petty gestures, the quiet retaliations, they were often worse than open hostility. They burrowed deeper, whispered the same ugly message: you don't belong. She pressed her lips together, determined not to let Carla see her flinch. Caleb stirred awake, blinking at the tray passing by. "Mom, can I have some juice?" Elaine brushed his cheek. "Of course, sweetheart. We'll ask when she comes back." But Caleb had noticed the skip too. His brows furrowed, his small voice hesitant. "She didn't give us any." Elaine's chest tightened. She forced her voice calm. "Sometimes people forget, baby, but we don't stop asking for what's ours." Caleb nodded slowly, though doubt clouded his eyes. From behind them, Margaret laughed softly, a cruel edge in the sound. Some people just don't know their place. That was it, the breaking point. Elaine's breath caught, and for a moment she wrestled with the familiar choice: silence to protect peace, or truth to protect dignity. She glanced at Caleb, saw his small shoulders stiffen, saw the question forming in his eyes, and she knew silence would wound him more than Margaret's words ever could. She turned slowly in her seat, her voice calm but strong enough for the cabin to hear. "My place is exactly where I've earned it, and so is my son's. Don't mistake your comfort for ownership." Gas and murmurs spread through the rows. A few passengers clapped quietly. Margaret's face flushed crimson, her mouth opening and closing like she was searching for a retort, but finding none. Caleb's eyes widened, then softened. He leaned closer to his mother, whispering, "You weren't scared." Elaine kissed his temple. "I was baby, but I didn't let fear speak for me." Carla stormed back toward row 1, clearly rattled by the rising tide of witnesses siding with Elaine. She bent low, her voice a hiss. "Enough! You are creating a disturbance. If you can't remain silent, I will escalate this further." Elaine's eyes met hers, unwavering. "Escalate it. Every camera here will capture exactly how your crew treated a paying mother and child, and the world will see." Phones lifted again. Passengers nodded, murmuring support. Carla paled slightly, retreating back toward the galley. Elaine settled back in her seat, her pulse racing but her spine straight. She hadn't wanted to become the center of a storm. She hadn't wanted to be a spectacle. But tonight wasn't about her wants. It was about the lesson Caleb would carry, and she had chosen which lesson it would be. Mr. Hayes leaned forward again, his voice proud. "That's how you break the silence, Mrs. Brooks. That's how you teach the boy who he is." Elaine exhaled slowly, feeling both drained and emboldened. She turned back to the window, the stars gleaming like witnesses in the dark. The night sky was vast, endless, and in its reflection, she saw herself not small, but steady, refusing to be moved. The cabin lights dimmed to a soft amber glow, the kind meant to encourage rest. The flight attendants moved in quieter rhythms now, collecting empty glasses. Sliding curtains closed, their smiles thin but mechanical. Most passengers had settled into a restless kind of half-sleep, but the current of tension hadn't disappeared. It lingered like static in the air, buzzing low and constant. Elaine adjusted the blanket over Caleb, who had finally drifted into deeper sleep. His small body curled against her side, his head pressed into her arm. She shifted carefully, unwilling to disturb him. Each time his breath steadied, she felt a fragile relief wash through her, but her own thoughts refused to rest. She replayed every word, every stare, every humiliation, Margaret's cruel laughter, Carla's thinly veiled threats, the captain's reluctance, and then the faces of the passengers who had spoken up the young Hispanic woman, Mr. Hayes, even the quiet nods from strangers. Support and scorn braided together in her mind, each tugging at her in different directions. Jordan Lee passed quietly down the aisle, his notepad in hand. He paused at Elaine's row, crouching to speak softly. "Mrs. Brooks, I've just received word from Anthony Graves. A formal investigation will begin as soon as we land. Video evidence has already been reviewed by headquarters. You and your son will be met at the gate by senior representatives." Elaine's lips curved faintly. "Thank you, but please understand, this isn't just about me. It's about the culture your crews are upholding. My son deserves better than this." Jordan nodded solemnly. "I agree, and tonight will not be buried. I'll make sure of that." When he moved on, Elaine leaned her head back against the seat. Her body ached with exhaustion, but her mind hummed with questions. How many times had this happened to others who didn't have Victor to call, or passengers willing to record? How many voices had been silenced in cabins just like this one? Her phone buzzed gently again. She slid it from her pocket and answered quickly, whispering, "Victor." His voice was steady, controlled, but she could hear the burn beneath it. "I've spoken directly with Anthony. This will reach the board by morning. Carla Whitman and the crew members who enabled this are already under review. Margaret Sloane's membership privileges are being frozen pending investigation. They will not walk away untouched." Elaine exhaled, relief mixed with unease. "I don't want vengeance, Victor. I want change, for Caleb, for others like him." "And that's exactly what we'll demand," Victor said firmly. "This isn't just an incident. It's a turning point. Trust me. By the time the story is finished, the whole industry will know." Her throat tightened. "Just promise me one thing. Don't let Caleb become a weapon in this fight. He's just a child." Victor's voice softened. "He's not a weapon. He's the reason. And one day, he'll know his mother stood so he'd never have to fight this same battle." Elaine closed her eyes, letting his words steady her. She slipped the phone back into her pocket, her hand resting protectively over Caleb's. From behind, Margaret stirred again. Even in the dim light, her voice carried. "Pathetic. All this drama over 2 seats. If people knew their place, none of this would happen." A few passengers shifted uncomfortably. Someone whispered, "She just doesn't stop." Another voice muttered, "Can't believe they let her talk like that after everything." Elaine didn't turn. She wouldn't give Margaret more of her energy. Instead, she whispered to herself, a quiet prayer. Let Caleb sleep through her poison. Let him not carry her words inside him. The turbulence picked up again, the plane shuddering gently. Caleb stirred but didn't wake. Elaine rubbed his back soothingly until his breathing steadied once more. From across the aisle, the young Hispanic woman leaned forward, speaking softly. "Señora, when this is over, tell your story. People will listen. It will matter." Elaine met her eyes, searching them for sincerity. She found it. Maybe I will. Maybe I have no choice. Mr. Hayes added his voice, warm and steady. You've already told it. Every person in this cabin will leave with it tonight, and that's how change begins. Elaine felt the truth of his words settle in her chest. Change didn't always start with speeches in grand halls or headlines in newspapers. Sometimes it started in quiet defiance at 30,000 feet, with a mother refusing to surrender her son's dignity. The hours dragged slowly, the hum of the engines, the faint snores of sleeping passengers, the occasional clink of glasses all blended into a strange, heavy rhythm. Elaine drifted in and out of shallow rest, but each time her eyes closed, Margaret's words echoed again, dragging her back. Finally, the captain's voice broke through the haze. Ladies and gentlemen, we've begun our descent. Please fasten your seat belts and prepare for landing. Elaine straightened, adjusting Caleb's blanket. He stirred awake, blinking sleepily. Are we there? Almost, she said softly, smoothing his curls. As the plane tilted downward, the lights brightened. Carla and the other attendants moved through the cabin, checking belts, though they avoided eye contact with Elaine. Jordan remained near the front, his posture firm, his presence a quiet reassurance. Margaret muttered once more, bitter even in defeat. We'll see who they really believe when this is over. Elaine closed her eyes, ignoring her. She focused instead on Caleb's small hand, tightening around hers as the wheels touched down with a heavy thud. The cabin jolted, brakes groaning, engines roaring as the plane slowed. Passengers clapped softly, relieved to be back on solid ground. Elaine felt her chest tighten again, but this time it wasn't fear. It was anticipation. Whatever storm awaited at the gate, she was ready. She had endured the humiliation, the venom, the threats, and she had not moved. Her son would leave this plane with a lesson carved into him. Dignity was not negotiable. The wheels screeched against the runway, and the cabin shuddered as the aircraft slowed. Passengers shifted upright, stretching stiff muscles, gathering belongings from under seats. But the air wasn't filled with the usual hum of casual chatter that accompanied landings. Instead, it pulsed with awareness. Everyone knew the flight wasn't ending quietly. Elaine's hand remained clasped tightly around Caleb's. He blinked awake fully now, rubbing his eyes, his voice groggy. We're here. Yes, baby, Elaine said softly, brushing his curls back from his forehead. We're here. But her eyes were fixed forward, toward the curtain at the front of the cabin. Jordan Lee stood there, posture firm, speaking quietly into his headset. The way he nodded sharply, the way his shoulders squared, told Elaine all she needed to know. There were people waiting for them outside this plane. As the aircraft rolled toward the gate, the captain's voice came through the intercom, clipped and professional. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Atlanta. For those with connecting flights, please check the monitors in the terminal for updated information. We ask everyone to remain seated until the aircraft has come to a complete stop. The words sounded routine, but Elaine heard the strain in his tone. Captain Myers wanted this flight to be over as much as anyone else. From several rows back, Margaret Sloane's voice sliced through the quiet. Finally, I'll be filing a complaint with corporate the moment I step off this plane. First-class standards have fallen into disgrace. Groans rose from surrounding passengers. One man muttered, Lady, you should be the one banned. The young Hispanic woman called back, You should be embarrassed, not complaining. A ripple of quiet agreement followed. Margaret stiffened, her lips pressed tight, but her eyes glowed with the same venom. Elaine ignored her. She leaned closer to Caleb, whispering, "Whatever happens when we get off, remember you didn't do anything wrong. Not once." He nodded solemnly, though the question still lingered in his eyes. She kissed his temple again, wishing she could shield him from the final act of this ordeal. The seatbelt sign chimed off, and passengers began rising, pulling down bags, stretching stiff legs. The narrow aisle filled quickly with bodies and luggage, but at the front, Jordan held up a hand, stopping anyone from disembarking just yet. His voice carried authority. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain in your seats. A situation requires deplaning in an orderly manner." Murmurs spread instantly. Passengers exchanged glances. Phones raised again. Cameras already recording. Everyone knew what this was about. Carla appeared from the galley, her expression pinched but composed. She tried to pass Jordan, but he blocked her path with a calm firmness. "Supervisor Whitman, you will remain seated until operations arrives." Her face flushed. "You don't have the authority." Jordan's eyes narrowed. "I do, and they'll be here any moment." At that instant, the cabin door opened, and a group of airline officials stepped aboard. Leading them was Anthony Graves, his silver hair neatly combed, his tailored suit crisp even after what must have been a rushed arrival. His presence commanded immediate respect. Behind him trailed two other executives and two airport security officers, their badges glinting. Anthony's gaze swept the cabin, settling on Elaine and Caleb in row 1. His face softened slightly as he approached, but his voice carried the weight of authority. "Mrs. Brooks, Mr. Brooks, on behalf of Skyline Airways, I extend a personal apology for everything you endured tonight." Elaine inclined her head politely, but remained seated, her hand still covering Caleb's. "Thank you. But apologies don't erase what happened." "You're right," Anthony said firmly, "which is why action is being taken immediately." He turned sharply toward Carla. "Supervisor Whitman, you are hereby relieved of duty effective immediately. Pending full investigation, please collect your belongings and exit with security." Gas rippled through the cabin. Passengers pulled out phones faster, capturing every moment. Carla's face drained of color. "You can't. This is outrageous. I was only doing my job." Anthony's tone hardened. "Your job is to ensure fairness, safety, and dignity for all passengers. Tonight, you failed. Security will escort you now." The two officers stepped forward. Carla sputtered, looking around desperately, but no one moved to defend her. Even her fellow attendants kept their eyes lowered. Finally, shoulders slumped, she collected her bag and walked stiffly toward the exit, escorted by security. Margaret Sloan leapt from her seat, voice shrill. "What about me? I was humiliated by being denied the seat I deserved. I'll have your jobs for this." Anthony turned his icy gaze on her. "Ms. Sloan, your Platinum Elite membership has been suspended effective immediately. You are banned from accessing priority seating or lounges until further notice. Your behavior tonight violated both passenger conduct and dignity protocols." Margaret's face twisted in outrage. "You can't treat me like this. Do you know who I am?" Anthony's reply was cutting. "Yes. And now the airline knows exactly who you are as well. Please disembark. Security will escort you too." A cheer broke from a section of the cabin. Someone clapped loudly. Others followed. Phones caught every second, and the sound of that applause filled the air like thunder rolling across the aisle. Margaret sputtered, her cheeks blazing red. But with no allies left, she was forced to march toward the exit under the same escort as Carla. Elaine exhaled slowly, her hand tightening around Caleb's. He looked up at her with wide eyes, whispering, Mom, did we win?" She bent low, kissing his forehead. "We stood. That's what matters." Anthony turned back to Elaine, his voice softer now. "Mrs. Brooks, Mr. Brooks Senior Leadership has requested to meet with you in the terminal lounge. Your husband is already en route." Elaine's heart leapt slightly at the mention of Victor. She nodded once. "We'll come." As passengers finally began to deplane, many paused to touch Elaine's shoulder, to nod at her, to whisper encouragement. "You did the right thing. Thank you for standing up. Your son will remember this forever." Each word, each gesture, felt like balm on wounds still raw. When it was finally their turn to leave, Elaine rose slowly, guiding Caleb forward. His small hand gripped hers tightly, but his steps were steady. Together, they walked down the aisle that had been their battlefield, past rows of strangers who now looked at them with respect instead of silence. As they stepped into the jet bridge, the cool air hit Elaine's face, and for the first time all night, she felt the weight of survival ease, replaced by the heavier weight of what came next: accountability, reform, and healing. The jet bridge carried Elaine and Caleb into the terminal, where a cluster of airline representatives waited under the harsh fluorescent lights. Among them, Anthony Graves stood at the center, his calm authority anchoring the group. Beside him was a younger man in a gray suit, holding a tablet, his expression taut with urgency. Security officers flanked the gathering, ensuring order. Passengers streamed past, whispering and glancing back, their phones still raised. Elaine could feel the eyes on her, the weight of being both witness and symbol, but her focus stayed on Caleb, whose hand was clutched tightly in hers. He looked around nervously, his voice small. "Is Dad here yet?" Elaine squeezed his hand gently. "He's on his way, baby. Any moment now." Anthony stepped forward. "Mrs. Brooks, Mr. Brooks, thank you for your patience. We've arranged a private lounge where we can discuss this matter in a more comfortable setting. If you'll follow me." Elaine nodded, though her jaw tightened. Comfortable wasn't the word for what lay ahead. But she walked with him, guiding Caleb through the wide hall until they reached a glass-walled lounge, guarded at the door. Inside, leather chairs and polished tables stood in stark contrast to the chaos of the plane. As they entered, Victor Brooks was already there, his tall frame commanding the space. He was on his feet instantly, crossing the room to pull Caleb into his arms. "There's my boy," he murmured, his voice a mixture of relief and restrained fury. Caleb clung to him tightly. Then Victor turned to Elaine, his eyes locking with hers. In that brief look, she read everything: his anger at what she endured, his pride in her strength, and his unspoken promise that this fight was far from over. She stepped into his embrace, letting herself rest against his chest for one breath, before pulling back to face the others. Anthony cleared his throat, bringing the room to order. "Mr. and Mrs. Brooks, allow me first to acknowledge the gravity of what happened tonight. This was not a miscommunication. It was a failure of our staff, our culture, and our responsibility to our passengers. It will be addressed." Victor's voice was calm, but it carried steel. "Addressed isn't enough. This isn't the first time bias has walked freely on an aircraft. My son was humiliated. My wife was threatened. You don't repair that with apologies and press statements. You repair it with change." Anthony inclined his head. "Agreed. Which is why we've already begun. Supervisor Whitman has been suspended. Ms. Sloan's privileges are revoked. But beyond individuals, structural reform is necessary. I want your partnership in shaping that." Elaine arched a brow. Our partnership or our silence? Anthony didn't flinch. Your voice. We cannot silence this. Too many people witnessed it. The videos are already circulating. The world will know by morning. And when they do, the question will be, what will Skyline Airways do about it? That's where I ask for your guidance. Victor exchanged a look with Elaine, then stepped closer to Anthony. Guidance is earned by proving accountability. So tell me what happens to the rest of that crew, to the captain who considered compromise more important than justice. The younger man in the gray suit interjected, nervous. Captain Myers acted within procedure. Victor cut him off, his voice sharp. Procedure isn't an excuse for cowardice. He watched my wife and son be degraded and chose neutrality. That is complicity. Anthony raised a hand, silencing his aide. His eyes stayed on Victor. You're right. Procedures must change. 2. The crew will be reviewed in full, and so will our policies, boarding, seating, authority delegation. Bias training is not enough anymore. We need a systemic shift. Elaine spoke quietly, but her words pierced the room. And what about the children? Because this wasn't just about me. It was about my son, who now carries the memory of being told he doesn't belong. No reform means anything if the next child boards a plane and lives through the same pain. Her voice cracked slightly, and Victor reached for her hand, grounding her. Anthony nodded solemnly. Then let the Brooks Protocol be our starting point. The phrase hung in the air, startling Elaine. The Brooks Protocol. Anthony's tone was steady. A reform package, clear policies to protect dignity in seating disputes, mandatory escalation channels that bypass biased crew, accountability measures that involve operations immediately. We'll name it after what happened tonight. Your family's story can shape change. Elaine felt a swirl of emotions relief. Anger, pride, exhaustion. To be reduced to a protocol was bittersweet, but to prevent others from suffering was powerful. She looked at Victor, then at Caleb, whose small face peeked out from his father's chest, tired but listening. Victor's voice cut through the weight of the moment. Fine. We'll work with you. But understand this, we won't lend our names to something symbolic. This must be binding, permanent, transparent, or else you'll have not just our voices against you, but the voices of every person who watched tonight unfold. Anthony inclined his head. Understood, and I welcome that accountability. Just then, one of the security officers entered, holding a phone. He whispered to Anthony, who frowned, then turned to the Brooks family. The videos have gone viral already. News outlets are calling. By morning, this will be a national story. Elaine's chest tightened. She hadn't wanted to become a headline, but she looked at Caleb, at his small hand gripping Victor's shirt, and she knew there was no hiding now. Victor's hand rested firmly on her back. Then we use it, not for our pride, but for our son, and for every family after us. Elaine closed her eyes briefly, then opened them with new resolve. Then let's make sure the world knows the truth. All of it. The room fell quiet, but the quiet wasn't empty. It was filled with the weight of something beginning bigger than one flight, bigger than one family. A storm was coming, but this time, Elaine wasn't alone in it. The lounge felt quieter now, though the silence was dense with anticipation. Elaine sat on the edge of a leather chair, Caleb leaning against her side, his eyelids heavy but his ears alert. Victor paced slowly across the carpet, his presence filling the room like a storm held in check. Across from them, Anthony Graves reviewed notes on his tablet while his aide lingered nervously by the door. Elaine's fingers traced small circles across Caleb's shoulder, grounding herself as much as him. He had seen too much, heard too much. She wished she could draw a curtain around his memory and hide tonight's ugliness from him. But the truth was already etched in his eyes. Victor finally stopped pacing. His voice was low, sharp with controlled fury. "Anthony, let's stop circling. What happens next? Not tomorrow. Not next week. Tonight. What happens?" Anthony set his tablet down, folding his hands. "Tonight. The crew is grounded. Carla Whitman will not work another flight pending the investigation. The attendants who supported her will face disciplinary review. Captain Myers has already been relieved of duty until further notice." Elaine arched an eyebrow. "Grounded is temporary. Reviews are often swept under rugs. What assurances do we have this won't fade like so many stories before it?" Anthony's voice steadied. "You have my word. And more than that, you'll have the board's attention by sunrise. The viral videos leave us no choice. This will not be buried." Elaine studied him carefully. She wanted to believe him, but she had heard promises before. Her throat tightened as she spoke. "Words are easy. Change is not." Before Anthony could respond, the lounge door opened, and a young woman in a navy dress stepped inside. She carried a laptop and the urgency of someone with breaking news. She whispered quickly into Anthony's ear, her face pale. He looked up at the Brooks family. "It's begun. Social media is on fire. The hashtag #WatchYourSeatForCaleb is trending nationwide. News anchors are already calling this the airline dignity incident." Victor let out a slow breath, his eyes narrowing. "Good. Then we use it. We'll control the narrative before others twist it. Elaine, are you ready for this?" Elaine's heart raced. She had never wanted to be a symbol. She had only wanted peace for her son, but now she realized peace couldn't exist without truth. She lifted her chin. "I'm ready, but not for spectacle for change." Anthony leaned forward, his voice urgent. "Then let us stand with you. If you'll speak, if you'll let us launch the Brooks Protocol tomorrow, we can show the world that this airline doesn't just apologize. It reforms." Victor studied him, eyes piercing. "And if you fail to uphold it, Anthony, if this becomes PR polish instead of systemic change," Anthony held his gaze, "then you'll expose us, and you'll have every right to." The words hung in the air. For a moment, the room was heavy with the weight of possibility failure or transformation, balanced on the edge of one night's injustice. Caleb's soft voice broke the silence. Mom Elaine bent close. "Yes. Baby, why are they talking about us?" His eyes flicked nervously between the adults. Elaine smoothed his curls. "Because something wrong happened, and we stood up. And when you stand up, sometimes the world pays attention." He frowned slightly. "But I just wanted to sit in my seat." Elaine's heart cracked at his innocence. She kissed his forehead, whispering, "Exactly. And that's why this matters. Because you should never have to fight for what's already yours." Victor sat beside them now, his arm across the back of the chair, his presence steady. "Caleb, tonight you saw something ugly, but you also saw people fight for you. Remember that." Anthony cleared his throat, his voice quieter now. "Mrs. Brooks, may I ask when you chose not to move? When you spoke to Margaret and Carla, what gave you that strength?" Elaine's gaze drifted toward her son, then back to Anthony. Him, always him. If I had moved, if I had stayed silent, Caleb would have carried the lesson that his dignity was negotiable. And that is a lesson I will never teach. Anthony nodded slowly, his face somber. Then that is the heart of the Brooks Protocol. Dignity is not negotiable. The aide at the door finally spoke, his voice hesitant. Sir, the press is already outside the terminal. They'll want statements. Victor's jaw tightened. We'll speak, but on our terms. He looked at Elaine. Elle, are you ready to step into that storm? Elaine inhaled deeply, her chest heavy, but her voice firm. I don't want the spotlight. But if stepping into it means shielding another child from this pain, then yes, I'm ready. Anthony rose, extending his hand. Then tomorrow begins a new chapter. Tonight, you've already made history. Elaine shook his hand, though her heart trembled. She knew this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a battle larger than herself, but she also knew she wasn't alone anymore. She looked at Caleb, his small hand resting in hers. She looked at Victor, steady as ever at her side. And for the first time all night, she felt something that had been missing since Margaret first demanded their seat. Hope. The private lounge felt like both sanctuary and stage. Outside its glass walls, journalists clustered with cameras ready, their voices rising in waves that broke against the guarded doors. Inside, the atmosphere was taut. Every moment weighted with consequence. Elaine sat upright. Caleb nestled against her side, his head resting on her arm. Victor stood nearby, his phone buzzing constantly with calls and messages, his expression hard as stone. Anthony Graves remained composed, though his aide in the gray suit paced nervously, glancing at the door as if he could feel the press surging closer. The young woman in the navy dress sat quietly in a corner, typing rapidly, monitoring the wildfire spreading across the internet. Elaine exhaled slowly, trying to steady her heartbeat. She had faced boardrooms full of skeptical men, competitors who doubted her competence, clients who dismissed her authority until her results silenced them. But this was different. Tonight wasn't just about her career, her reputation. It was about her son, her family, her dignity, and soon it would be about much more than them. Victor finally set his phone down with a sharp click. Every outlet wants a statement. CNN, MSNBC, local affiliates, even international desks. They're already framing it as the airline discrimination story of the year. If we don't speak tonight, someone else will own the narrative. Elaine's chest tightened. And if we speak, we become the narrative. Victor crouched in front of her, his hands resting gently on her knees. His voice softened. Hell, you already are the narrative. The choice now is whether you let others twist it, or whether you tell it yourself. Caleb stirred, lifting his head groggily. Mom, are we going on TV? Elaine smoothed his curls, forcing a small smile. Not TV, baby. Just talking to people who want to know what happened. He frowned, his brow creasing. But why can't they just believe us? Elaine swallowed hard, her throat aching. Because sometimes the world needs to hear it out loud. Caleb needs to see the truth with their own eyes. Anthony leaned forward, his voice steady but cautious. Mrs. Brooks, if you and your husband choose to speak, know this, the airline will stand behind your words. The Brooks Protocol is already being drafted. Announcing it with your story could change not just this airline, but the entire industry. Elaine met his eyes sharply. Don't turn my family into your shield. If you stand behind us, it better be because you mean it, not because you fear bad press. Anthony inclined his head, acknowledging the blow. Fair. Then let me be clear, I mean it. I've worked for this company 30 years. I've seen complaints buried, voices ignored. This time, it ends differently. The aide in gray shifted uneasily. "But, sir—" "The board hasn't approved." Anthony silenced him with a raised hand. "The board will follow where truth leads. They won't have a choice." Elaine looked at Victor, then down at Caleb's small hand wrapped around hers. Her chest rose and fell, every breath heavy with the choice before her. She thought of her grandmother, who had been turned away from restaurants, her mother, told which schools her children could attend, and now her son, asked to give up a seat he had every right to. Different times, same story. Her voice emerged quiet, but resolute. "We'll speak, but not as victims, as a family that refused to move. That's the story the world needs to hear." Victor nodded, pride flickering in his eyes. "Then let's make sure they hear it right." Moments later, the doors opened, and the sound of reporters surged louder. Security guided the Brooks family forward, Anthony at their side, Jordan Lee trailing just behind. The bright lights of cameras hit Elaine's face like a wave, blinding and overwhelming. But she stood tall. Caleb clutched her hand, half hiding behind her, but his steps matched hers. Questions flew like arrows. "Mrs. Brooks, how did it feel when they asked you to move? What do you say to passengers who think this was just a misunderstanding? Will you sue the airline?" Elaine paused at the podium hastily assembled in the terminal, the logo of Skyline Airways glinting behind her, microphones crowded close, red recording lights blinking. She inhaled deeply, then let the silence stretch a moment. The crowd quieted, waiting. Her voice was steady, low but carrying. "Tonight, I boarded a plane with my 9-year-old son. We held tickets. We held confirmation. We held the right to our seats. And yet, we were told to give them up for no reason but to make someone else more comfortable. We were told to compromise our dignity, to teach my son that his place could be taken from him. We refused." A murmur rippled through the crowd, pens scratching, cameras flashing. Elaine's eyes swept the room, finding Caleb's wide gaze turned up at her, Victor's steady presence anchoring her. She continued, "This isn't just about one flight. It's about the quiet ways dignity is denied every day. In boardrooms, in schools, in seats that were already paid for. It's about children watching and learning whether their worth is negotiable. And tonight, my son learned something different. He learned that we stand." The silence that followed was profound. Even reporters lowered their pens, the weight of her words sinking in. Victor stepped forward then, his voice strong and measured. "As CEO of SkyTech Systems, I've built systems that power airports around the world. And tonight, I promise this: if Skyline Airways, or any airline, fails to uphold dignity, those systems can be reprogrammed. Access can be revoked. No airline is too big to fall. We will hold them accountable." Gasps spread. The threat was clear, powerful, undeniable. Cameras swung wildly between Elaine and Victor, capturing the force of their united stance. Anthony stepped up then, adding his voice, and Skyline Airways will not wait to be forced. "Tonight, we commit to launching the Brooks Protocol reform, ensuring no family endures what the Brooks family endured. Dignity is not negotiable, not here, not ever again." Applause broke from the passengers who had gathered nearby, those who had witnessed the flight and now bore testimony. Phones streamed live, hashtags surged, voices rose. Elaine turned slightly, crouching to meet Caleb's eyes. "See, baby, the truth speaks louder than lies." He nodded slowly, his small smile breaking through the heaviness. "We didn't move." Elaine held him close, her own eyes wet but steady. "No, sweetheart, we never will." The cameras captured that image, the mother and son, standing together, refusing to be moved. And in that moment, the story shifted from incident to movement. The applause that followed Elaine's words lingered like an echo, bouncing through the terminal even after the microphones were lowered and the cameras were turned off. Reporters rushed to push the story out faster than their competitors, their voices urgent into phones and headsets. Outside, the night buzzed with the kind of energy that comes when the ordinary collides with the extraordinary. Elaine stepped back from the podium, her body trembling with exhaustion she wouldn't allow anyone to see. Caleb's small hand remained wrapped in hers, his face half hidden against her side, both overwhelmed and proud. Victor stayed close, his broad frame shielding them as flashes continued to spark. Anthony Graves guided them through a side corridor toward a quieter exit. "We'll arrange transportation to take you home," he assured them. "There will be security detail in case the press follows. I'll stay in contact through the night." Elaine nodded faintly, but her mind was elsewhere. As the adrenaline of speaking faded, the weight of what had just unfolded settled heavily onto her chest. She had spoken not just for herself, but for countless others. And though she had stood strong, she felt raw, stripped bare before the world. Victor sensed her silence. As they reached a private car waiting at the curb, he leaned close, his voice low. "You are remarkable. Don't doubt it, Elle." She looked at him, her eyes glistening. "I didn't want to be remarkable. I wanted a quiet flight with my son." Victor's jaw tightened. "And that's exactly why you had to speak. Because you shouldn't have to be remarkable, just to sit in your seat." Caleb climbed into the car, curling up against the seat with the kind of exhaustion only children could reach after holding fear for too long. Elaine stroked his curls as he drifted off, whispering, "Sleep, baby. You're safe now." The ride home was silent, except for the hum of the tires and the occasional buzz of Victor's phone. Every news outlet wanted live interviews. Every commentator wanted sound bites. But Victor ignored them all, his hand resting lightly over Elaine's knee, a silent vow that his family came first. When they arrived at their home, the house was already surrounded by quiet security. Inside, the familiar smell of lavender candles greeted them, a small comfort in the storm. Elaine carried Caleb upstairs, tucking him into bed, smoothing the blanket over him till his breathing deepened into peaceful sleep. Only then did she allow herself to sag into the chair beside his bed, her body shaking with the release of everything she had held in. Victor knelt in front of her, his hand cupping hers. "Elle, talk to me." She lifted her eyes, tears streaking silently down her cheeks. "I'm so tired. Vic, tired of fighting battles that shouldn't exist. Tired of proving we belong where we already earned the right to be." Victor's eyes softened, his thumb brushing across her hand. "I know. And that's why this fight is bigger than us now. Because you turned tonight into something no one can ignore. You gave our son and every son and daughter who looks like him a glimpse of hope." Elaine closed her eyes, pressing her forehead to his. "Promise me this won't consume him. Promise me Caleb won't spend his childhood as a symbol," Victor whispered. "I promise. He'll be a boy first. But he'll also know his mother gave him the strength to stand when the world tried to push him down." They stayed there for a long time, in the quiet of their son's room, holding on to each other as the world outside spun faster. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the blinds, warm and indifferent to the firestorm erupting beyond the Brooks home. Elaine woke to the sound of her phone buzzing relentlessly. Messages, missed calls, Emails flooded in. Her name was trending. Seat for Caleb had become more than a hashtag. It was a movement. She scrolled through videos of passengers from the flight posting their accounts. Mr. Hayes, his voice steady, saying, "I've lived 70 years, and I've seen this too many times. Tonight, Mrs." Brooks showed us all how to stand. The young Hispanic woman recorded a short clip in Spanish, translated captions below. She fought with dignity, not anger. That's how change begins. Tears blurred Elaine's vision. These weren't just strangers anymore. They were voices amplifying hers, proof that she hadn't carried the burden alone. Downstairs, Victor was already on the phone with Anthony Graves, his tone clipped but professional. "Yes, Anthony. We'll review the draft of the Brooks Protocol. No, we won't accept watered-down language. This must be enforceable. We're not here for a PR stunt." Elaine poured herself coffee, her hands trembling around the mug. When Victor ended the call, he turned to her, his face both weary and determined. "The board meets in 48 hours. Anthony wants us there. He wants you to speak." Elaine blinked. "Me?" "Why? Because your voice can't be filtered," Victor said firmly. "They need to hear the truth from you, not from executives spinning it into comfort." Her stomach nodded. "I'm not a public speaker. I'm not a politician." Victor stepped closer, his hands resting on her shoulders. "You're a mother who refused to move. That's more powerful than any politician." The words lingered in her mind long after, echoing through the day as news anchors replayed her statement from the terminal. As social media swelled with stories of others who had been asked to give up seats, silenced, ignored, the ripple was growing into a wave. That evening, Elaine sat alone on the back porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in streaks of orange and violet. She thought of her grandmother's stories, of battles fought and dignity denied, and of the small victories that carried generations forward. Now it was her turn in the long chain of resistance and resilience. She whispered into the fading light, "Let this matter. Let this not fade. Inside." Caleb's laughter floated through the house as Victor played a board game with him, his child's joy cutting through the heaviness like a blade of sunlight. Elaine smiled faintly, hope flickering stronger than the night before. For the first time in a long time, she believed this fight might actually change something, not just for her, not just for Caleb, but for every mother, every child who dared to claim their place and refused to move. 2 days later, the Brooks family found themselves stepping into a towering glass building in downtown Atlanta, its mirrored surface reflecting the morning sun. Elaine walked with her head high, though her stomach was tight with nerves. Victor walked at her side, steady and commanding, while Caleb stayed home with his grandmother. This wasn't a space for children. This was a battlefield of another kind. Inside, the atmosphere was hushed and tense. The board of Skyline Airways had convened an emergency session. Media trucks lined the streets outside. Reporters crowded the sidewalks, but security kept them at bay. Elaine clutched her notebook, though she wasn't sure if she'd use it. Her truth was in her chest, not on the page. Anthony Graves met them in the lobby. His face bore lines of exhaustion, but also a flicker of resolve. "Thank you for coming. The board is waiting. They've read the drafts. They're divided." Victor's voice was calm but hard. "Then let's undivide them." The boardroom was vast, its long oak table gleaming under recessed lights. Around it sat men and women in tailored suits, their expressions a mixture of skepticism, concern, and calculation. At the head was Elaine Winters, the chairwoman, her silver hair immaculate, her gaze sharp as glass. As the Brooks entered, the murmurs died. Every eye turned to them. Anthony introduced them formally, then gestured for Elaine to take the floor. She stood in the center of the room, the silence pressing against her chest. For a moment, her throat tightened, but then she remembered Caleb's small voice. "I just wanted to sit in my seat." And suddenly, the fear melted into fire. Her voice was soft at first, but it carried. "I'm not here as a CEO. I'm here as a mother. 2 nights ago, my son and I boarded one of your planes with valid tickets for seats we paid for, yet we were told to give them up. Why? Because someone else believed they deserved our place more, and because your employees allowed that belief to stand." She paused, scanning the faces before her. Some avoided her eyes. Others watched intently. "My son is 9. He doesn't understand platinum status or elite loyalty programs. He only understands that someone looked at him and decided he didn't belong. And when he looked to me, I had a choice: to move quietly, to keep the peace, or to stay seated and teach him that his dignity is not for sale. I chose to stay." Her voice grew firmer, steadier. "And when I refused, I wasn't just standing for my family. I was standing for every passenger who has been silenced, belittled, ignored, for every mother who held her child's hand and wished the world would treat them with fairness. This isn't about seats. This is about dignity." The room was utterly still. Victor stepped forward then, his voice resonant with authority. "I've spent my career building systems that airlines depend on. And let me be clear, no airline is untouchable. If Skyline Airways chooses complacency over reform, it will collapse not because of bad press, but because trust, once broken, cannot be restored. Tonight, the world is watching. You can be remembered as the airline that ignored dignity, or the airline that changed the standard." Elaine Winters leaned forward, her hands steepled. "And what, precisely, do you propose Anthony stepped in, sliding documents across the table? The Brooks Protocol, mandatory accountability measures, immediate escalation paths when bias is alleged, protections for passengers in disputes, independent review of complaints, transparent reporting. Training is not enough, this is structural. One board member, a man with a clipped beard, scoffed. And what will that cost us? Millions in retraining, in compliance, in oversight. Investors won't like it." Elaine turned her gaze on him, sharp as a blade. "What will it cost you if families stop flying with you? If lawsuits pile at your door? If your brand becomes synonymous with humiliation? Respect is cheaper than scandal." Another board member, a woman with keen eyes, leaned forward. "And what do you say to passengers who fear this is pandering, that airlines are bending over backward for politics rather than service?" Elaine drew in a breath, her voice calm but cutting. "This isn't politics. It's humanity. When a child is told to move for someone else's comfort, that's not politics, it's a wound. And wounds left untreated fester. You can choose to heal, or you can choose to bleed." The silence that followed was heavy. Even those who had doubted shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Elaine Winters finally broke the stillness. "Mrs. Brooks, Mr. Brooks, you've made your case with conviction. The question remains, will the public see this as genuine reform, or as an act of desperation?" Victor's jaw tightened, but Elaine answered first. "The public will see the truth, because this isn't about branding. It's about a little boy who only wanted to sit in his seat, and a mother who refused to teach him surrender. If you implement this, and if you enforce it, People will know it's real. Anthony cleared his throat, his voice steady. The time for hesitation is gone. The world has already decided this matters. Now it's up to us to decide whether we'll lead or follow. The boardroom erupted into murmurs, debate spilling across the table. Some resisted, others pushed forward. Elaine and Victor stood together, silent but unyielding. They had said what needed to be said. Finally, Elaine Winters raised her gavel, bringing the room to order. Enough. This board will vote now. The vote was tense. Voices called, hands raised. For a moment, the outcome wavered. Then, one by one, the scales tipped. Majority approved. The Brooks Protocol was adopted. Elaine let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Victor's hand brushed against hers, a silent acknowledgement of victory. Anthony's shoulders sagged with relief. Even Elaine Winters allowed a faint nod, though her expression remained cool. As the meeting adjourned, Elaine stood tall, though her body trembled with exhaustion. Reporters would be waiting. The world would be listening. But in her heart, one truth rang clear. She had refused to move. And because of that, everything had moved. The story of Elaine Brooks reminds us that dignity is not a privilege. It is a birthright. Too often, life presents us with moments where the easier choice is to stay quiet, to comply, to avoid conflict. But silence teaches acceptance, and acceptance allows injustice to grow. Elaine's choice not to move wasn't about defiance, it was about teaching her son, and all of us, that worth is never up for negotiation. For older generations, this message resonates even more deeply. Many have lived through times when doors were closed, voices silenced, and rights denied. Elaine's story is a reflection of those struggles, but also a reminder that progress comes when ordinary people make extraordinary choices in ordinary moments. In life, we may not all face such public battles, but we all face decisions that define what we stand for at work, in families, in our communities. The lesson is simple but profound. Never compromise dignity. Never teach the next generation that their value depends on someone else's permission. By standing firm, we not only protect ourselves, but also shape a future rooted in respect, fairness, and hope. Thank you so much for watching and sharing this journey with us. Your time, your presence, and your voices give meaning to stories like this. If this story touched you, please like, share, and subscribe, not just to support our channel, but to keep spreading messages of respect, justice, and hope. Together, we can make sure stories like this are never forgotten.